It was 7:45 on a Tuesday morning in Austin,
Yes, I
Texas,
am.
and the daily
Got
press on 6th Street was already packed wall to
Heads up, we have a
wall.
situation in the East Lobby.
Victoria Hayes
Copy that.
stood near the
On
back of
one.
the line,
Should I call for backup?
scrolling through her email with one thumb, half
All
listening to
set.
the hum of
Have a good one.
conversation around her. The quarterly board meeting kicked off in an hour. She needed coffee the way most people needed oxygen. When she finally reached the front and handed the barista her corporate card, the young woman tried it twice, then turned the screen toward her. "I'm so sorry. It's coming up declined." Victoria went still. The line behind her was long and impatient, and she could feel every second of it. That's when a voice came from just behind her, deep, unhurried. "I'll cover it." A man in a gray security uniform stepped forward and laid a 10 and a 5 on the counter. "Add a black coffee to that too, please." Victoria turned. Tall, broad-shouldered, quiet eyes. The kind of stillness that comes from having survived something. "You really don't have to do that. Already done." He gave her a small, genuine smile. "Good luck with your morning." Their eyes met briefly, something passing between two strangers who had no reason to recognize each other but somehow felt they should. Neither of them knew what that moment meant. She didn't know he was Elijah Washington, the senior software architect whose resume she had personally declined just 4 days ago. He didn't know she was Victoria Hayes, CEO of Meridian Systems, the Austin tech company that had decided his 3-year employment gap was too much of a question mark to risk. They walked out of that coffee shop and went their separate ways. The universe apparently had other plans. Elijah Washington hadn't always worn a security badge. 3 years earlier, he'd been a senior architect at Amazon's Seattle headquarters, 11 years building the kind of distributed systems that processed hundreds of millions of transactions a day. He held 3 patents. He had a team of 20 in a corner office and a life that by every honest measure was full. He had a wife named Simone who made him laugh harder than anyone alive. She had a way of tilting her head when she was thinking, purple always her favorite color, and a voice that could turn the smallest moment into something worth remembering. They'd been trying for a second child for 2 years. When Simone finally got pregnant with Maya, the joy felt like something they'd earned. Caleb was 5, obsessed with dinosaurs, already asking when his baby sister would be old enough to play with him. Then came the complications during delivery, a placental abruption that turned catastrophic in minutes. The doctors moved fast, but not fast enough. Simone hemorrhaged. Maya was stillborn. The room that had been full of hope became a room full of machines that couldn't save either of them. Elijah got the news standing in a hospital waiting room at 11:47 p.m. holding Caleb's hand. His son didn't understand yet. Wouldn't understand for weeks, just kept asking when Mommy and Maya were coming home. Simone's last text was still unread on Elijah's screen. "Almost there. Caleb's going to be the best big brother. Love you both." For months after, Elijah couldn't write code, couldn't open a laptop without that message appearing in his mind like a haunting he couldn't escape. He took a leave of absence that quietly became a resignation. Caleb stopped talking for nearly 4 months. He would sit at the kitchen table and stare at the empty chair where Simone used to sit, the one with the purple cushion she'd picked out, and not say a word. Elijah sold the house. He couldn't walk through it anymore. Couldn't pass the nursery they'd painted together. Couldn't see the photographs on the mantel without feeling like he was drowning on dry land. They moved to Austin, far enough from Seattle's geography of grief, warm enough that Caleb could be outside, small enough that Elijah could breathe without being reminded of everything at every corner. The security job at a downtown office building wasn't where he'd imagined landing, but it offered what they needed most: stable hours, health insurance, and enough mental quiet to focus entirely on one thing: getting Caleb back. Gradually, they climbed out. Caleb started speaking again around month 6. By month 8, he cracked his first joke. Elijah cried in the bathroom afterward with the water running, just letting himself feel it. By the time Meridian Systems posted an opening for a senior security infrastructure role, Elijah had spent 2 years quietly rebuilding. Updated certifications, modern frameworks, late evenings after Caleb went to bed working through systems he'd been away from. The position was 11 minutes from Caleb's school. The work was exactly the kind of complex, layered problem-solving he'd missed like a missing limb. He spent a week on his resume. He was proud of it. The rejection came in 4 days. Brief, corporate. We appreciate your interest but have decided to move forward with candidates whose experience more closely aligns with our current requirements. He read it twice, closed his laptop, and made Caleb breakfast. Dignity, he'd learned, meant you didn't beg for opportunities that didn't want you. You just kept moving. Victoria Hayes had built Meridian Systems in her junior year at UT Austin, in a dorm room that smelled like burned coffee and stubbornness. By 33, she'd grown it to 350 employees, secured $120 million in Series C funding, and been written about in every publication that mattered. On paper, her trajectory was extraordinary. Off paper, it was lonelier than she let anyone see. 80-hour weeks didn't leave much room for anything else. Her last date had spent the entire evening trying to pitch her on his friend's app. As one of the few female CEOs at her level in Austin's tech scene, everything she did was dissected twice, too aggressive, too lenient, too emotional, too cold. There was always a lens she couldn't satisfy. Few people knew that she'd lost both parents in a car crash during her sophomore year. She channeled everything into her work after that, poured the grief directly into code and systems and the building of something that couldn't be taken in a phone call. It had worked. Meridian was real. But sometimes, very late at night, she sat in her glass-walled office and wondered what exactly she had traded to get here. The morning after the coffee shop, her assistant Rachel Morgan set a folder on her desk. Preliminary screening rejections from the last round of hiring. Victoria flipped through it absently until a name stopped her. Elijah Washington. She recognized it immediately. The security uniform, the quiet eyes, the $15 on the counter. She pulled his full file and actually read it this time. 11 years at Amazon, 3 patents, references from people she respected. And there, flagged in red by the screener, 3-year employment gap. Candidate cited personal circumstances, possible flight risk if issues resurface. Not recommended. Something about the phrase personal circumstances sat wrong with her. She opened a browser tab and typed his name. The first results were industry articles. Impressive work on distributed architecture, the kind of foundational systems thinking that most engineers spend their whole careers trying to develop. Then, near the bottom of the page, a headline from 3 years ago. Seattle engineer loses wife and newborn daughter in childbirth tragedy. The article was short, a complicated delivery, a hemorrhage, 2 lives lost in one night. The surviving husband and son not available for comment. A former colleague quoted, "One of the most naturally gifted systems architects I've ever worked with, and a genuinely decent man." Victoria sat back slowly. The gap wasn't instability, it wasn't avoidance. It was a man who had lost his family in a single night, held himself together enough to raise his surviving child, and was now carefully, quietly trying to find his way back. And her company had sent him a form letter rejection. She picked up her phone. "Rachel, can you get me contact information for Elijah Washington and clear my 2 o'clock?" Elijah was scanning IDs at the front desk when his phone buzzed. He let it go to voicemail, checked it on his break. "Mr. Washington, this is Rachel Morgan calling from Meridian Systems. Our CEO would like to meet with you this afternoon at 4 if you're available. Please call to confirm." He listened to it twice, then he called back. At exactly 4, he stepped off the elevator on Meridian's top floor. Lady Bird Lake spread out below the windows, warm and green in the afternoon light. The receptionist walked him to a corner office where the woman from the coffee shop was standing with her back to the room, looking out at the city. She turned when she heard him. "Mr. Washington, thank you for coming." She offered her hand. "I'm Victoria Hayes." Recognition moved through his face. "The CEO who rejected your application," she said without softening it. "Please sit down." He sat across from her, relaxed but attentive, the posture of a man who had learned that very few things in a conference room were actually life or death. "I went back through your file. Your technical background is exceptional, but there was a 3-year gap that the screening process flagged." "I know. I'd like to hear the actual story, not the version you think an employer wants." "The truth." Elijah was quiet for a beat. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and my newborn daughter during childbirth. My son Caleb was 5. He went silent for almost 4 months. I resigned from Amazon to be present for him full-time while he found his way back. The security work gave us stability while we rebuilt. That's the gap. Why didn't you explain that in the screening process? Because I don't want to be hired out of pity, firm, unhurried. I want to be evaluated on what I can do, not on what I've survived. That gap was judged without any context at all. That's how those decisions usually get made. I understand it. Doesn't mean I have to agree with it. She held his gaze. What if I told you we have a senior infrastructure opening? Leading a small team developing our next-generation authentication system? I'd want to know why I'm being reconsidered 4 days after a rejection. Because I think the process missed something important. The question is whether you're still interested. Elijah considered it. I am, but I have conditions that aren't negotiable. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I pick Caleb up from school at 2:45. I don't miss his appointments. I can work nights after he's in bed. Those daytime hours are fixed. That works. She slid a folder across the desk. Take this home. Read it. Call me by Friday. As he reached for it, he asked the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind since he walked in. Is this because of the coffee shop? She didn't look away, partly, mostly because I think we made an error and I'd like to correct it. He stood. For the record, Ms. Hayes, if I take this role, I'm not carrying it on goodwill. I'll earn my place. I'd expect nothing less. A pause. And it's Victoria. Word moved fast at Meridian. By the end of Elijah's first day, 3 separate people had asked Rachel Morgan whether he and Victoria knew each other from before. The theories ranged from a college connection to something considerably more interesting. Elijah heard the whispers. He kept his head down and got to work. The authentication team was stuck. A critical security vulnerability had been stalling their product release for 6 weeks. Elijah spent his first 4 days doing nothing but reading. Existing code, architecture notes, incident logs. He asked questions and listened more than he talked. On day 5, he called the team together. It's a timing conflict. He pulled up 2 parallel threads on the screen. Under heavy load, these 2 processes overlap in a specific sequence that opens a window. It's narrow, half a second at most, but it's consistent. It's not random and it's not environmental. It's structural. Sophia Mitchell, one of the younger engineers on the team, leaned forward. We've been chasing that for 2 months. How did you find it in 4 days? I ran into almost the same architecture problem at Amazon about 7 years ago. Different system, same underlying logic. Once you've seen it once, it's hard to unsee. He walked them through the fix. Clean, no over-engineering. By end of day, the team was implementing it. The gossip about his relationship to Victoria began to fade. What replaced it was quieter and more durable. The kind of respect that can't be manufactured and doesn't need to be explained. Victoria noticed the shift. She made it a point not to hover over Elijah's team, but she noticed the energy change in the hallways. She noticed how Sophia started sending her weekly updates without being asked, and how they were actually good. She also noticed smaller things. How Elijah stopped to help the new junior engineer figure out the badge access system on his second day. How he gave credit to other people when presenting to the leadership team, as if he'd thought about it deliberately and decided it was a value worth demonstrating. How he kept a single photo on his desk, a boy with a gap-toothed smile and a dinosaur backpack, squinting into the sun. Their interactions were brief at first, professional. An exchange in the hallway about the project timeline, a shared elevator, a mild conversation about the city's traffic. Nothing that stood out, yet both of them began to notice the days when those brief exchanges didn't happen. Then one morning, Victoria came in to find something sitting on her desk. A handwritten note folded in half. When she opened it, for the headaches. Sometimes the best direction is just forward. E. Beside the note, a small travel tin of peppermint tea. She had mentioned her tension headaches exactly once, and in passing in the elevator 8 days ago. She had not expected anyone to hear it, let alone remember. She put the note in her desk drawer. It became a quiet ritual, a cup of tea or a handwritten note left on her desk before the rest of the office arrived. Nothing that required acknowledgement, never mentioned between them, just a small, consistent signal that someone was paying attention. She began to reciprocate in her own way. A protein bar left on his desk after she overheard him skipping lunch 3 days running. A brief message after a long team presentation. Good work in there, small but intentional. One evening, working late on a projections review, Victoria walked past the break room and stopped. Elijah sat at the long table with a boy who could only be Caleb. The same gap-toothed smile from the desk photo, bent over a worksheet with the focused gravity of a very serious 11-year-old. Notebook paper, a math problem, a half-eaten granola bar. Elijah looked up. "Ms. Hayes, sorry. The sitter had a family thing and I have a deadline tomorrow morning. I was about to find a corner." "Don't apologize." She smiled at the boy. "You must be Caleb." Caleb looked up and studied her with his father's eyes, careful, measuring. "You're the one who gives him the hard stuff." "Guilty," Victoria said, "only because he's good at it." Caleb seemed to find this acceptable and returned to his worksheet. "You don't smile much, like the doctors." Victoria, caught off guard, didn't know how to respond. Elijah's expression softened, but he didn't intervene, letting his son's honesty stand. Later, while Caleb worked, Elijah and Victoria talked quietly near the doorway about the project schedule. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Bring him whenever you need to, Elijah. We're not a clock-in, clock-out operation here." The gratitude on his face was simple and entirely real. It moved through her like something she hadn't felt in years, the strange warmth of being seen by someone who had no reason to see you. 3 weeks into Elijah's time at Meridian, the authentication project hit a new milestone. The vulnerability was resolved, the code was cleaner, and the timeline was back on track. Team morale had shifted from defensive to collaborative. Victoria began to see Elijah not just as a competent hire, but as someone who operated from a set of principles she recognized but couldn't quite name. He didn't chase credit. He didn't posture. He showed up, did exceptional work, and treated people with a baseline respect that felt increasingly rare. One Friday afternoon, she passed the break room again. Elijah was helping Caleb with a science project, something about ecosystems. Patient, gentle, breaking down complex ideas into language an 8-year-old could hold. Victoria stood in the doorway for a moment, unnoticed, watched the way Caleb leaned into his father's explanations, the way Elijah never talked down to him, always treated his questions like they mattered. When Caleb looked up and saw her, his face brightened. "Miss Victoria, do you know about food chains?" "A little," she said, stepping inside. "What are you learning?" Caleb launched into an explanation about predators and prey, his hands moving as he talked, Elijah watching with quiet pride. It was such a small thing, A conversation about science homework in a break room on a Friday evening. But something about it lodged in Victoria's chest and stayed there. The realization that she was watching a kind of fatherhood she hadn't seen up close in years. Competent, present, unashamed. Later, after Caleb had packed up his things and they were heading toward the elevator, Elijah turned back. "Thank you for making space for this." Victoria met his eyes. "You're a good father, Elijah. That's not something you should have to apologize for." He nodded, something unspoken passing between them, and stepped into the elevator with his son. Victoria stood in the empty hallway for a long moment after they left, the building quiet around her, and realized she was smiling for no reason she could name. The next Monday, there was a new note on her desk. "Some directions are harder than others, but you're good at finding your way. E." She read it twice, then tucked it into the drawer with the others. By the end of Elijah's first month, the dynamic between them had shifted in ways neither acknowledged but both felt. Conversations lasted a little longer. Eye contact held a beat past professional. The rituals of tea and notes and small gestures had created a language they were both learning to speak. Victoria found herself looking forward to the mornings when she'd find something waiting on her desk. Found herself noticing the days when Elijah was out for Caleb's appointments, the office somehow quieter in his absence. Elijah found himself thinking about Victoria in moments that had nothing to do with work. The way she listened when people talked, actually listened instead of waiting for her turn. The way she'd started asking Caleb about his projects when she saw them in the break room. Genuine curiosity instead of polite adult performance. One evening, working late on budget projections, Victoria's tension headache bloomed into something brutal. She was massaging her temples when there was a soft knock on her doorframe. Elijah stood there with a mug of tea. "Saw your light on. Thought you might need this." She accepted it, grateful. "How did you know?" "You get a line right here when it's bad." He gestured vaguely toward his own forehead. "Noticed it a few weeks ago." The intimacy of that observation, the fact that he'd been paying close enough attention to see it, settled over her like something she didn't have words for. "Thank you." He nodded and turned to go, then paused. "Victoria, if the headaches are this frequent, you might want to check your monitor height. Sometimes it's just ergonomics." She looked at him, this man who had lost everything and somehow still had the bandwidth to notice when someone else was in pain. "I'll do that." After he left, she sat with the tea and let herself feel the weight of what was building between them. Not just attraction, though that was there. Something deeper. The recognition that she'd been performing competence for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be known. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the first week of Elijah's second month. Victoria had been preparing for days, reviewing projections, tightening presentations, anticipating questions. What she hadn't anticipated was Gerald Hawthorne. Hawthorne had been on Meridian's board for 4 years. He'd made his money in legacy enterprise software back when legacy enterprise software was the entire conversation. He had a sharp eye for financial leverage and a blunt instrument for everything else. The meeting opened smoothly. Progress reports, revenue updates, strategic initiatives. Then Hawthorne clicked to a new slide. "I want to address the authentication project." Victoria's attention sharpened. "We're 6 weeks behind the original roadmap and the budget has been revised twice. I want to ask the room, are we confident in the leadership structure currently in place?" A pause. Deliberate. "I'll be candid. I've heard concerns from people I trust about certain hiring decisions made outside standard channels." His gaze moved briefly toward Elijah, who sat along the side wall with a notepad. "When a company starts bending its own protocols, it raises the question of whether decisions are being made on merit or on something else." The room went still. Everyone understood what he was really asking. Victoria's expression didn't move. The authentication system is the most rigorous development cycle we've run in 5 years. We slowed down because getting it right isn't optional. That's not a failure of judgment. It is judgment. Perhaps, Hawthorne said, but markets don't reward deliberate. Markets reward results. Elijah set down his notepad and stood. Mr. Hawthorne, calm, unhurried. I came to Meridian after 11 years at Amazon leading distributed systems architecture. I was brought in outside standard channels because a screening process made an error and the CEO corrected it. He walked to the presentation screen and pulled up a set of benchmarks. These are our current authentication metrics against the top 5 competitors in our space. He let the room look. 35% more secure with 18% less processing latency. And the final protocol layer hasn't deployed yet. That goes live in 3 weeks. For the next 10 minutes, he walked the board through the full picture. Security architecture, market positioning, projected revenue impact from enterprise clients who would pay significantly for what they were building. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't editorialize. He let the data dismantle what Hawthorne's implications had been trying to build. When he finished, the room sat with it. Hawthorne studied the final slide for a long moment. That's more comprehensive than I expected. I know, Elijah said and sat back down. As the meeting broke up and people filed out, Victoria caught Elijah's eye across the emptying room. Something passed between them that didn't need a word yet. A recognition, mutual and clear. He hadn't just defended the project, he'd walked into the fire for her. Not with ego, not with performance, with composure and quiet courage and the kind of competence that doesn't ask for anything back. That evening, most of the office had gone home when Victoria found Elijah still at his desk, working through a system diagram. She closed the door behind her. I want to thank you for today. He looked up. I just presented facts. You and I both know it was more than that. She sat across from him. You could have stayed quiet. Let Hawthorne rattle the room, maybe even turned it to your advantage. Plenty of people would have. That's not how I operate. I know that about you now. They sat in the quiet for a moment, the building settling around them. Can I ask you something that isn't about work? He closed the diagram. Go ahead. After the accident, how did you keep moving? How did you get out of bed and take care of Caleb when you had nothing left to run on? His eyes changed. Not pain exactly. Something older. One morning at a time. For a while, just getting Caleb dressed and making breakfast was everything I had. Then you add one more thing, and then another. You don't rebuild the whole house at once. You just fix one board. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I lost my parents in a car crash sophomore year of college. She said it simply, like something she'd practiced setting down. I've never dealt with it. Not really. I just threw myself into work. Not many people know that. You don't have to carry it alone, Elijah said. That's the thing nobody tells you. You think holding it all by yourself is strength. It's not. They talked for a long time after that. About grief and momentum. About raising kids and running companies. About the faces they wore in public and the ones they wore in the dark. When Victoria finally looked at her phone, it was past 11:30. She stood and reached for her bag. Elijah handed her a small paper bag. Inside was a box of peppermint tea and something else. A brass compass, small and old, with a crack along the edge of the glass face. This was my grandfather's. I carried it for a while when I felt completely lost. The needle sticks a little. It doesn't always point exactly true, but it always gets you somewhere close. He looked at her steadily. Sometimes close is enough to start with. She held the compass carefully, the weight of it both literal and metaphorical in her palm. Elijah, I don't know what to say. Go home, Victoria. The spreadsheets will still be broken in the morning. She laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, and walked out into the quiet hallway with the compass in her hand, and something unfamiliar blooming in her chest that felt dangerously close to hope. After that night, something loosened between them. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the careful professional distance they'd been maintaining began to feel less like structure and more like a habit neither of them needed anymore. Elijah continued leaving small handwritten notes with Victoria's morning tea. Observations about the day ahead aligned from something he'd been reading. Once a tiny origami crane that Caleb had made specifically for the lady who gives Dad the hard stuff. Victoria kept every note in the same drawer as the first one. She started showing up to team reviews 5 minutes earlier, actually listening instead of checking her phone. Elijah started staying 10 minutes later on nights when a junior engineer was struggling, just to make sure they weren't spinning their wheels alone. They were careful, both of them, both carrying enough scar tissue to know what carelessness costs. The Saturday morning of Elijah's 4th week started unremarkably. He was making pancakes with Caleb, flour dusting the counter when his phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Need to drop off some contractor files for weekend review. Is now okay? He typed back, sure, we're home. 20 minutes later, she stood in his doorway holding a messenger bag, taking in the modest apartment with the kind of attention that wasn't judgment, just observation. The walls held Caleb's drawings, purple crayon prominent in most of them, a bookshelf packed with engineering texts and dinosaur encyclopedias, a kitchen table where breakfast was clearly in progress. Caleb looked up from where he was pouring batter, spatula in hand. Miss Victoria, do you know how to make pancakes? Victoria's expression went momentarily blank, the look of someone who'd been asked a question in a language they'd forgotten how to speak. I usually skip breakfast. Dad says breakfast is important for your heart. Caleb's tone carried the authority of someone repeating received wisdom. You should stay. Elijah caught Victoria's eye, offering an out, but she surprised them both. I'd like that. She set down her bag. Elijah handed her a spatula. The mechanics of cooking together were awkward at first. Victoria approached the griddle with the same focus she brought to board presentations, which meant her first pancake burned while she was calculating optimal heat distribution. Caleb giggled, the sound bright and unguarded. It's okay. Dad burns them sometimes too. Victoria looked at the charred disc on her plate, then at Elijah, then at Caleb, and something in her face softened. She laughed, small but genuine, and the sound of it did something to the air in the room. They ate together at the kitchen table. Caleb talked about his science project, about the food chain, about how his teacher said ecosystems were all connected. Victoria listened like she was learning something important, asking questions that weren't performance, and Caleb bloomed under the attention. Elijah watched them, his son and this woman who'd walked into their world and somehow made it larger without crowding it. The morning light slanted through the window, ordinary and irreplaceable, the kind of moment that doesn't announce itself as significant until later when you're trying to remember exactly when everything changed. After Caleb went to his room to work on homework, Victoria helped clear plates. She moved carefully in the unfamiliar space, learning the geography of someone else's life. Thank you for letting me crash your morning. Elijah's hands stilled in the soapy water. You didn't crash anything, you made it better. The words hung between them, heavier than either expected. Victoria left an hour later with the files she'd ostensibly come to deliver, but Elijah knew, and she knew that wasn't why she'd really come. She'd wanted to see where he lived, wanted to understand the life he'd built in the wreckage of the one he'd lost, and he'd let her in. The quarterly board meeting 2 weeks later brought the kind of tension that changes trajectories. Gerald Hawthorne had not forgotten being publicly corrected. Men like him rarely did. He'd spent the intervening weeks making calls, building alliances, looking for leverage. The meeting opened with financial reviews, operational updates, the usual rhythm. Then Hawthorne shifted in his seat. I'd like to revisit the authentication timeline. We're now 8 weeks behind the original projection. Victoria kept her expression neutral. We've discussed this. Quality over speed. I understand the principle. But our competitors aren't waiting for us to achieve perfection. He pulled up a slide showing market share projections. Every week we delay is a week we lose ground. The room listened, which brings me to a broader concern. His tone shifted, became almost conversational. I've been doing some due diligence, standard practice when we make unconventional hiring decisions. Elijah, sitting along the wall, went very still. Hawthorne clicked to a new slide. Mr. Washington's background is impressive. Amazon tenure, patents, clear technical expertise. But there's a 3-year gap that our initial screening flagged for good reason. And I've learned there's an ongoing concern from family members about stability and living conditions as they relate to childcare. Victoria's jaw tightened. That's completely inappropriate to raise in this context, is it? When we're trusting someone with our core infrastructure, when questions of judgment and reliability are material to our fiduciary responsibility. He looked around the table. I'm not making accusations. I'm asking whether we've done adequate diligence on someone who was hired outside standard protocol. The implication was clear. The room understood what Hawthorne was really doing. Undermining Elijah to undermine Victoria's judgment to create chaos that served some larger agenda no one in the room could quite see yet. Elijah stood. The movement was unhurried, carrying the same composure he'd shown the first time. Mr. Hawthorne, you're welcome to question my technical credentials. Happy to walk through any architecture decision, any code review, any metric you'd like to examine. But my family situation isn't material to this board's oversight. It's also not your business. Hawthorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. When it affects your ability to deliver, it becomes the board's business. Then let's talk about delivery. Elijah pulled out his phone, connected it to the conference room display. Within seconds, he had the authentication project dashboard up. Current status 3 weeks ahead of revised timeline. Security benchmarks exceeding every target. Client feedback from beta testing. Overwhelmingly positive. He walked through each metric with surgical precision. No emotion, no defensiveness, just data that spoke louder than Hawthorne's insinuations. The delay we took wasn't because I was distracted. It was because we found a structural flaw that would have cost us 6 months and significant reputation damage if we'd shipped it. We fixed it. We're better for it. And we're going to deliver a product that sets a new standard. He looked directly at Hawthorne. As for my son, he's thriving. His grades are excellent, his health is monitored carefully, and he has a father who will always put him first. That's not instability, that's integrity. The silence that followed had weight. One of the other board members, an older woman named Patricia Chen, spoke up. I think we've seen enough to be confident in the project leadership. I move we table this discussion and focus on material business matters. Seconded, someone else said immediately. Hawthorne's expression went flat, of course. But as the meeting continued, Victoria watched him, saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he was already pivoting to his next move. Men who built empires on leverage didn't give up when one tactic failed. They just found another angle. After everyone filed out, Victoria found Elijah packing up his notes. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Don't be. He met her eyes. I've dealt with worse. And at least now we know what we're dealing with. What do you mean? Someone fed him that information about family concerns. Someone who knew exactly where to look and what would cause maximum damage. Patricia Wright, Victoria said quietly. Your sister-in-law. Elijah nodded. She called me last week, said she was worried about Caleb's living situation. Wanted to discuss alternatives. I shut it down, but clearly she's been talking to people. And Hawthorne found her. Or she found him. Either way, this isn't over. They stood in the empty conference room. The city spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, and both understood they'd just crossed into different territory. This wasn't just about work anymore. It was personal, and it was strategic, and it was targeting the thing Elijah valued most. That night, Victoria showed up at Elijah's apartment at 11 p.m. Unannounced, which by now had become its own kind of permission between them. Caleb was asleep. Elijah was at the kitchen table with a laptop, researching family law. He looked up when she knocked, surprise giving way to something softer. She came in without preamble, set a folder on the table. Performance equity package, backdated to your start date. $6,000 in signing bonus we should have structured from the beginning, plus options that vest over 4 years. Elijah opened the folder, scanned it, then closed it. Victoria, I can't accept this. It's not charity. It's correcting an oversight. You were undercompensated from day one. The timing makes it look like a response to Hawthorne's attack, like you're trying to shore up my finances to answer his questions about stability. Because I am. Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before, frustration bleeding through the composure. Patricia is building a case that you can't provide adequately. This helps. I have dignity, Elijah. I deserve respect. Taking money that looks like a defensive move kills both. Even if it helps you keep Caleb, especially then. His voice was firm but not harsh. Because if I take it under these circumstances, every decision I make from here forward is compromised. Every win looks bought. Every choice looks like I owe you. Victoria's hands curled into fists on the table. So what? You just let her build her case? Let Hawthorne use your son as leverage? I fight it my way, on my terms, not by accepting charity disguised as compensation. They stared at each other across the table, the tension between them crackling with something that wasn't quite anger but wasn't far from it either. Why are you really here, Victoria? The question landed like a challenge. Because watching that hearing today, listening to Hawthorne talk about your stability like you're some kind of risk factor when you're the most stable person I've ever met, made me want to burn the whole system down. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. And because I don't know how to help you without you throwing it back in my face, Elijah's expression softened. He stood, moved around the table, sat in the chair beside her instead of across from her. After Simone died, people tried to help. Colleagues, neighbors, family. Everyone wanted to fix it, make it better, take away the pain, but the only help that mattered was the kind that let me keep my agency. That treated me like a capable adult who'd been dealt a terrible hand, not like a victim who needed saving. He reached out, covered her hand with his. You want to help? Be here, like this. Not as my CEO, not as someone trying to solve my problems, just as someone who sees me. Victoria looked down at their hands, his dark skin against her pale fingers, the simple contact carrying more weight than a dozen contracts. I see you, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Good, because I see you too, and you're just as scared as I am. They sat like that for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just existing in the same space with the same fear and the same hope and the understanding that whatever was building between them was going to cost something before it gave anything back. The bedtime story happened by accident. Victoria had stayed late the following Friday, buried in projections for a client pitch. When she emerged from her office around 8:30, she heard voices coming from the break room. Elijah sat on the small couch with Caleb tucked against his side, reading from a paperback book with a well-worn cover. His voice was different when he read, softer but more animated, doing different voices for different characters. Caleb's eyes were half closed, fighting sleep but not wanting to miss the story. Victoria stood in the doorway unseen, watched this moment that had nothing to do with her. This private ritual between father and son that they'd carried through loss and rebuilding and the daily work of loving each other. When Elijah finished the chapter, Caleb stirred. Is Miss Victoria going to be part of our family? The question came out sleepy but sincere. Elijah's hand stilled on the pages. Why do you ask, buddy? She looks at you like Mama did in the pictures, and she makes you smile different, like you used to. Victoria's breath caught. What would you think about that, if she was? Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking it through with the seriousness he brought to important things. Mama would want you to be happy. You told me that when we moved here, that she'd want us to be okay. That's true. And Miss Victoria is nice. She's learning about pancakes. Plus, she asks real questions about my projects, not just grown-up questions. Elijah's laugh was soft. Those are good reasons. So it's okay with me. Caleb yawned. But you have to tell her about the purple thing. The purple thing? That it was Mama's favorite color. So if Miss Victoria uses purple, it's not trying to replace Mama, it's remembering her. Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth, trying not to make a sound. I'll tell her, Elijah promised. Now come on, bedtime for real. As Elijah stood and guided Caleb toward the door, he caught sight of Victoria in the hallway. Their eyes met. She couldn't hide that she'd heard everything, didn't try to. Later, after Caleb was settled in the small office alcove where Elijah had set up a makeshift sleeping area for late nights, they stood together in the empty hallway. He's a wise kid, gets it from his mother. Elijah's voice carried the kind of ache that never quite goes away, just becomes part of the landscape. Simone had this way of cutting through complexity, seeing what mattered. Tell me about her, if you want. So he did, standing there in the fluorescent light of an office building after hours. Elijah talked about Simone. Her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she'd challenge him when he was being too analytical, how she'd wanted to be a teacher, how she'd volunteered at Caleb's preschool even when she was exhausted from the pregnancy, how she'd painted the nursery purple because it was her favorite color, and she wanted Maya to know that from the beginning. Victoria listened without interrupting, giving him space to remember out loud. When he finished, she said quietly, I'm not trying to replace her. I don't even know if I can do what she did, be what Caleb needs. You don't have to replace her. Elijah's gaze was steady, honest. You just have to be you, and let Caleb decide if there's room in his heart for both. What about you? Is there room in yours? The question hung between them, everything they'd been circling for weeks distilled into 7 words. Elijah reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, let his hand linger against her cheek. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't. Victoria leaned into the touch, let herself have this moment of permission, of possibility. Then they heard footsteps in the hallway, someone from the night cleaning crew, and they stepped apart with the ease of people who'd become practiced at maintaining boundaries even as those boundaries blurred. The compass came back to Elijah 2 weeks later. He found it on his desk one Monday morning, the cracked glass face replaced with new crystal, the needle moving freely instead of sticking, a note in Victoria's handwriting. Found a watchmaker on South Congress who fixes things that stick. He turned it over in his hands, felt the weight of the gesture. She'd taken something broken and made it whole again, not because she needed to fix him, but because she understood that some tools work better when they're restored. That evening, he stayed late. Found Victoria in her office staring at financial models that weren't cooperating. She looked up when he appeared in her doorway, and her smile was immediate, unguarded. Hey yourself. He held up the compass. Thank you for this. It was a small thing. No, it wasn't. He came in, closed the door, sat across from her desk. You took something I gave you in a moment of vulnerability, and instead of just keeping it as a symbol, you fixed it, made it functional again. I thought you might need it back. I do, but not the way you think. He set the compass on her desk, slid it toward her. I want you to keep this one, the original, the one that works now, because you're the one who needs to trust that even broken things can point true again. Victoria picked it up, the brass warm from his hand. What about you? I'm working on a different kind of compass these days, one that doesn't rely on magnetic north. What does it rely on? The answer came out before he could stop it, honest and bare. You. The words settled between them like a stone dropped in still water. Ripples spreading outward. Victoria stood, moved around the desk, stopped in front of him close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Close enough to count the ways fear and want were warring in her expression. Elijah. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this. Family. Connection. I built everything I have by keeping people at arm's length, and now you're asking me to just let you in, let Caleb in, and I don't have a blueprint for this. Neither do I. He stood too, matched her proximity. I buried my wife and daughter 3 years ago. I didn't think I'd ever want to let anyone close again. Didn't think my heart had room for anything except grief and Caleb. What changed? You did. You showed up in that coffee shop and paid for a stranger's coffee. You called me in for an interview when you didn't have to. You made space for my son in your building and your schedule and eventually your Saturday mornings. You didn't try to fix me. You just saw me. His hands found hers, held them carefully. So yeah, I'm scared, terrified that I'm asking you to step into something you didn't sign up for. But I'm more scared of not asking, of letting fear win again. Say it again. The demand in her voice was soft but unmistakable. I'm falling in love with you, Victoria. Have been for weeks, maybe since that first morning when you laughed at your burned pancake and I realized you were willing to be bad at something just to be present with us. She was crying now, tears tracking down her face, but she didn't look away. Say it again. I love you. And it scares the hell out of me, but I'm not running from it. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of 3 years of armor finally cracking open. He pulled her close, one hand in her hair, the other at her waist, and kissed her back with everything he'd been holding in check. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria pressed her forehead to his I love you too, and Caleb, and I have no idea how to do any of this right. We'll figure it out. One board at a time, remember? She laughed through tears. You and your construction metaphors. They stood there in her office, the city lights spreading out below them, and let themselves have this moment before reality came back with all its complications. Reality came back hard. The legal notice arrived at Meridian's main office 11 days later. Dataflow Systems filing intellectual property infringement claim against Meridian Systems, specifically targeting the authentication architecture developed under Elijah Washington's leadership. The claim alleged that core algorithms in Meridian's system were substantially similar to proprietary methods Dataflow had licensed from Amazon's patent portfolio, suggesting Washington had imported protected IP when he left his former employer. Victoria read the notice twice, her coffee going cold on her desk. The timing was surgical. The authentication system was set to launch in 3 weeks. This claim would halt everything, force a code review, potentially expose them to litigation that could drag on for months. She called an emergency board session for that afternoon. Hawthorne arrived early, expression carefully neutral. I've reviewed the Dataflow claim. It's concerning. It's baseless, Victoria said flatly. Elijah's work here is entirely original. Then proving that should be straightforward. Hawthorne's tone was reasonable, which made it more dangerous. But until we do, I think we need to consider suspending Mr. Washington pending the investigation. Absolutely not. Absolutely. Victoria, be strategic. If this goes to litigation and he's found to have violated his non-compete or imported protected IP, every decision he touched becomes questionable. Better to create distance now. She saw it then, the whole architecture of what Hawthorne was doing. The custody threat from Patricia wasn't random. The IP claim wasn't coincidental. Someone was systematically attacking Elijah from multiple angles, and Hawthorne was either orchestrating it or exploiting it. "We investigate internally first," she said. "Full code review, documentation audit, comparison analysis. If we find any legitimate overlap, we address it then. That could take weeks, then we work fast." The board meeting was tense but ultimately backed Victoria's approach. They had 72 hours to complete a preliminary review before deciding next steps. Elijah took the news with the same composure he brought to everything else, but Victoria saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw set. They spent the next 3 days essentially living at the office. Victoria cleared her calendar. Elijah brought in 2 senior engineers he trusted. They went through every line of code in the authentication system, comparing it against Amazon's published patents, against Dataflow's documented methods, against industry standard practices. Rachel kept them fed with takeout. Sophia ran interference with the rest of the team, keeping rumors contained. On hour 41, Elijah found it. He pulled up 2 files side by side on the screen. "Here, this is what they're claiming is overlap." Victoria leaned in, scanning the code. "What am I looking at? A standard load balancing algorithm that's been industry practice for a decade. It's in every distributed systems textbook published since 2015. Dataflow didn't invent it. Amazon didn't patent it. It's foundational architecture. So the claim is bullshit. The claim is technically accurate that there's overlap, but it's like claiming someone violated your patent on wheels because they put round things on a car." He pulled up more documentation. "I can trace this exact pattern back to academic papers from MIT in 2013, open source implementations from 2014, conference presentations where it was openly discussed and shared." Victoria's mind raced ahead. Someone fed Dataflow just enough technical detail to make the claim look credible without giving them enough context to see it was meaningless. And the only people who would know our architecture well enough to cherry-pick that specific element would be someone internal or someone with access to our development roadmap. "Hawthorne," Victoria said. "Can't prove it. But the pattern fits. He attacked me personally in the board meeting, got shut down. Patricia's custody concern hasn't gained traction because Caleb's doing well. So now he's attacking my professional credibility with something that sounds technical enough to create doubt." Victoria sat back, fury and calculation warring in her chest. "We present this to the board tomorrow. Show them the claim is baseless, expose the timing as suspicious. It won't be enough." Elijah's voice was quiet. "Even if we kill the IP claim, even if Hawthorne's involvement becomes obvious, he's on the board. He has resources, and he's clearly willing to weaponize anything against us. So what do we do? What we've been doing. We tell the truth, we show our work, and we trust that competence and integrity eventually win." She wanted to believe that, wanted to live in a world where being good at your job and being honest was enough. But she'd been a CEO long enough to know that sometimes the game was rigged and sometimes the only way to win was to change the rules. The week before the client pitch that would make or break their timeline, Patricia Wright called Elijah. He was making dinner, Caleb doing homework at the kitchen table, when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't answer, but some old instinct about family made him pick up. "Elijah, I need to talk to you about Caleb." Her voice was tight, formal. "What about him?" "I've been speaking with some people, educators, child welfare advocates, and there are concerns about whether his current living situation is optimal. His current living situation is with his father, who loves him and provides for him." "What's this really about, Patricia?" "Simone would want him to have the best possible life. And right now, you're working 80-hour weeks at a job that's under investigation, living in a 2-bedroom apartment, dealing with custody concerns and professional instability. Who told you about the investigation?" She didn't answer directly. "I'm not trying to take him away. I'm trying to ensure he's cared for. If you're drowning, Elijah, let someone throw you a rope. I'm not drowning, I'm building a life and Caleb is thriving in it. Then you won't mind a formal review to confirm that. The implication was clear. She was threatening to escalate this beyond phone calls and conversations, into courts and official proceedings. Do what you feel you need to do, Patricia. But understand that I will fight for my son with everything I have. Not because I'm stubborn, because he deserves a father who shows up. He ended the call before she could respond. Caleb looked up from his homework. Was that Aunt Patricia? Yeah, buddy. She wants me to live with her, doesn't she? Elijah's throat tightened. How did you know? I heard you talking to Miss Victoria about it last week. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard. Come here. Caleb came over and Elijah pulled him into a hug, fierce and protective. Nobody is taking you anywhere. You're my son. We're family, and that's not changing. But what if the judge says I have to go? Then I will appeal and fight and do everything the law allows to keep you with me, because you belong here. Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing. I don't want to live with Aunt Patricia. She's nice, but she doesn't know about my projects, and she doesn't let me stay up late when there's important stuff happening. Despite everything, Elijah smiled. Those are good reasons. Plus, what would Miss Victoria do without us? Someone has to teach her about pancakes. The simplicity of 8-year-old logic, the clarity of it, made something loosen in Elijah's chest. You're right. We're essential. They finished dinner together. Elijah helped with homework, did bedtime, read the next chapter of their current book, and the whole time, he felt the weight of what was coming pressing down like weather he couldn't escape. Later that night, after Caleb was asleep, Victoria showed up. She didn't knock, just used the key he'd given her 2 weeks earlier. Found him on the couch, laptop open, staring at family law statutes. She sat beside him, didn't say anything, just took his hand. Patricia's escalating. I know. Rachel pulled some public records. She filed preliminary paperwork this afternoon for a custody evaluation. Elijah closed the laptop. How did Hawthorne find her? Or how did she find him? Either way, they're coordinating. The timing is too perfect. IP claim hits, then custody concern surfaces, all designed to make you look unstable and make my judgment look compromised. Victoria's voice was steady, but her grip on his hand was tight. What's the play? We document everything. Caleb's school records, medical records, therapy notes if there are any, your financial statements, character references. We build a case that shows he's not just okay, he's thriving. And if that's not enough, then we trust the system to see the truth. You don't sound convinced, because I've seen the system fail good people before. Her voice cracked slightly. And the thought of you losing Caleb because Hawthorne is playing chess with your life makes me want to burn everything down. Hey, he turned to face her fully, cupped her face in his hands. We're not losing. Not Caleb, not each other, not this. We're going to tell the truth publicly and trust that it's enough. Say it again. The echo of her own demand from weeks earlier made him smile despite everything. I trust that truth wins, that competence matters, that being a good father and a good man counts for something. One more time. I trust us. She kissed him then, salt on both their faces, though neither was sure whose tears they were tasting. And they held on to each other like people who'd found something rare and breakable and worth protecting at any cost. The client presentation happened on a Wednesday morning with 200 people in attendance and everything riding on the outcome. Victoria stood at the podium in Meridian's largest conference room, flanked by Sophia and 2 other senior engineers. Elijah sat in the front row beside her, the authentication system dashboard live on the screens behind them. The prospective client was a Fortune 100 financial services firm, the kind of account that could validate everything Meridian had built or expose every weakness in their armor. Hawthorne had positioned himself strategically at the back of the room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Victoria walked through the technical architecture with precision, highlighting security benchmarks, compliance frameworks, scalability metrics. When she handed off to Sophia for the deep dive demonstration, the room leaned forward, engaged. Then came the Q&A. A senior VP from the client side raised his hand. "We've heard excellent things about your system, but we've also heard rumors of IP concerns. Can you address those directly?" The room went still. Victoria didn't hesitate. "We received a claim from Dataflow Systems alleging overlap with licensed Amazon patents. We conducted a comprehensive code review and found the alleged overlap involves industry-standard load balancing algorithms that have been in public domain since 2013. The claim has no merit, and we've documented that thoroughly." The VP nodded. "And the engineer who developed this system, there were questions about his background?" Elijah stood before Victoria could respond. His voice carried to every corner of the room, calm and clear. "I'm that engineer. I spent 11 years at Amazon building distributed systems. I left 3 years ago when my wife and newborn daughter died during childbirth, and my surviving son needed his father full-time. I took that time to be present for him while he recovered from trauma. When he was ready, I updated my skills and returned to work. Meridian hired me because the CEO recognized that a 3-year gap spent being a good father isn't a liability, it's a strength." He pulled up a slide. "Every line of code in our authentication system is original work, documented, reviewed, and built to standards that exceed anything currently on the market. I stake my professional reputation on that. More importantly, I stake my integrity as a father who teaches his son that honesty and competence matter." The silence that followed was different from before, not uncertainty but respect. The VP looked at his colleagues, then back at Elijah. "That's the kind of clarity we need in a security partner. Thank you for the directness." The presentation continued. By the time they wrapped, the client was asking about contract timelines and implementation schedules. As the room emptied, Hawthorne approached Victoria near the podium. His expression was tight. Impressive performance. "But you know this isn't over." "No," Victoria kept her voice low. "It's not, but I know exactly what you're doing, Gerald. The IP claim, the custody interference, the coordinated attacks. Someone's been feeding you information and you've been weaponizing it." Hawthorne's smile was thin. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Then you won't mind when Rachel presents the board with phone records showing your communications with Patricia Wright and Dataflow's legal team in the weeks leading up to both attacks." His composure cracked slightly. "You're bluffing. Try me." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You came after a good man doing good work because you needed to create chaos. I don't know what your endgame is yet, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, you're done." She walked away before he could respond, adrenaline singing through her veins. The emergency board meeting was called for the following Monday. Victoria had spent the weekend with Rachel, building a timeline that connected every suspicious event over the past 6 weeks. Phone metadata, meeting schedules, legal filing dates, all arranged into a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Hawthorne had been in contact with Dataflow's attorney 3 days before the IP claim was filed. He'd met with Patricia Wright twice in the 2 weeks before she escalated her custody concerns. He'd had lunch with the journalist who'd written a speculative piece questioning Meridian's hiring practices. Separately, each connection could be explained away. Together, they painted a clear picture of coordination. The board assembled at 9 a.m. Victoria opened with the client presentation results. They've committed to a 3-year contract worth $42 million with expansion options that could double that. The authentication system will launch on schedule in 2 weeks. There was applause, but it felt muted. Everyone knew this meeting wasn't really about celebrating wins. "However," Victoria continued, "we need to address a pattern of behavior that's been undermining this company's integrity and targeting one of our most valuable team members." She nodded to Rachel, who began presenting the timeline on screen. Over the past 6 weeks, Gerald Hawthorne has engaged in what appears to be a coordinated campaign to discredit Elijah Washington and, by extension, my leadership decisions. This includes facilitating a baseless IP claim, connecting with a family member pursuing custody action, and seeding negative press coverage. Hawthorne stood abruptly. This is outrageous speculation based on circumstantial evidence. Sit down, Gerald. Patricia Chen's voice cut across the room like a blade. Let her finish. Rachel continued through each data point. The phone records were particularly damning, showing multiple calls between Hawthorne and Dataflow's legal team in the days before the claim was filed. Why would I care about some engineer's custody situation? Hawthorne's voice had taken on a defensive edge. Because discrediting Elijah discredits me, Victoria said. And discrediting me serves your larger goal, which I suspect involves forcing an acquisition that benefits you financially. She pulled up another slide. 3 weeks ago, you had a private dinner with the CEO of Tech Ventures Capital. 2 weeks ago, they made preliminary inquiries about Meridian's openness to acquisition. Last week, you purchased additional shares through a shell company that would position you for significant profit if such a deal went through. I'm allowed to make investment decisions. You're not allowed to sabotage the company to manufacture conditions that make acquisition necessary. You're not allowed to weaponize personal tragedy against an employee to create the chaos you need. The room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. I move for Gerald Hawthorne's immediate removal from the board, pending investigation into potential breaches of fiduciary duty. Victoria's voice was steady. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up except Hawthorne's. Patricia Chen spoke next, her tone formal. The motion carries. Gerald, your board seat is terminated effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the building and will be in touch through legal counsel regarding the investigation. Hawthorne looked around the table, calculation giving way to something uglier. You're making a mistake. Without my connections, without the acquisition option, you're vulnerable. Markets will eat you alive. Then we'll compete on merit instead of manipulation, Victoria said. Doors that way. Security arrived moments later. Hawthorne left without further protest, but the look he gave Victoria on his way out promised this wasn't finished. After the board members dispersed, Elijah found Victoria in her office. She was standing in the window, looking out at the city, arms wrapped around herself. You okay? He moved to stand beside her. She deserved it. Hell, she'd deserved it for weeks. But watching her exposed, knowing he'd orchestrate worse if he could, made something ugly show up in his expression that she hadn't wanted to see in anyone. He's gone now. Can't hurt us from outside, can't he? Victoria turned to face him. Patricia still has her custody evaluation. The judge doesn't care that Hawthorne was feeding her ammunition. The concern is on record now. Then we document the truth. We show that Caleb is healthy, happy, safe. We let his life speak for itself. And if that's not enough? The question hung between them, all the fear she'd been holding back finally surfacing. Elijah pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. Then we appeal, we fight, we do whatever it takes. Because I'm not losing my son and I'm not losing you. She pressed her face against his chest, let herself be held for a moment before the next battle began. The custody evaluation took place over 3 weeks. A social worker named Margaret Torres came to Elijah's apartment twice, unannounced. She observed morning routines, reviewed Caleb's bedroom, checked the refrigerator and medicine cabinet, asked questions about schedule and discipline and emotional support. Caleb handled it with the seriousness of someone who understood stakes without fully grasping consequences. He showed Ms. Torres his homework, his drawings, his dinosaur books. He talked about his dad's cooking, about Miss Victoria teaching him about business, about how purple was his mom's favorite color, so they always had something purple in the apartment. The second visit, Victoria was there making breakfast. Ms. Torres watched them together, the easy rhythm they'd developed, the way Caleb moved between them like it was natural. After Caleb went to brush his teeth, Ms. Torres asked Victoria directly, "What's your role in this child's life?" Victoria measured her response carefully. "I'm someone who cares deeply about both Elijah and Caleb. We're building something together, the three of us. I'm learning how to be present in ways I never had to before. It's not about replacing his mother. It's about making space for him to grow with the love he already has and the love we're creating. And if your relationship with Mr. Washington ends, then I'd still care about Caleb's well-being. But I don't think it's ending. I think we're just beginning." Ms. Torres made notes, expression neutral, and left without indicating which way her recommendation would lean. The school visit happened the following week. Ms. Torres spoke with Caleb's teacher, reviewed his attendance records, his grades, his participation in class activities. His teacher, a woman in her 50s named Mrs. Patterson, was unequivocal. "Caleb is thriving. His father is involved, attentive, never misses parent-teacher conferences. The boy talks about his family with warmth and security. Whatever questions have been raised, they don't match the child I see every day." The medical review was harder. Caleb had regular checkups, his vaccinations were current, but there was a 3-month period after Simone's death where Elijah had missed 2 scheduled appointments because Caleb was refusing to leave the house. Ms. Torres flagged it in her report. Missed appointments during a period of documented family crisis, indicating possible neglect of medical needs. Elijah's pediatrician wrote a supplemental letter. The missed appointments occurred during acute grief response in both father and child. When they resumed care, Mr. Washington was forthcoming about the reasons for the gap, demonstrated clear understanding of his son's medical needs, and has maintained perfect attendance since. This is not neglect. This is a family surviving trauma. Patricia's attorney used the medical gap anyway, arguing it showed a pattern of prioritizing emotional comfort over practical care. The hearing was set for the first week of April, nearly 4 months after that morning in the coffee shop that had started everything. Elijah wore a suit he'd bought specifically for this. Victoria sat in the gallery 3 rows back, exactly where he'd asked her to be. Close enough to see, far enough not to be intrusive. Caleb stayed with a trusted neighbor. The judge had decided an 8-year-old didn't need to be present for adults arguing about his future. Patricia's attorney opened strong. She presented the modest apartment, the demanding job, the recent professional controversies, the missed medical appointments. She painted a picture of a man stretched too thin, unable to provide the stable, resourced environment a child deserved. "My client can offer private schooling, immediate extended family support, a spacious home in a safe neighborhood, and most importantly, the focused attention of someone whose sole priority is the child's well-being, not divided between a demanding career and single parenthood." The implication was clear. Elijah loved his son, but love wasn't enough. When it was Elijah's turn, his attorney kept it simple: character witnesses. Mrs. Patterson testified about Caleb's academic performance and emotional health. The pediatrician testified about Elijah's attentiveness to medical needs. Sophia testified about witnessing Elijah's careful balance of work and fatherhood, about the times he'd left meetings without hesitation when Caleb needed him. Then Victoria took the stand. Patricia's attorney objected immediately. "The witness has a romantic relationship with Mr. Washington. Her testimony is biased. The judge overruled. I'll weigh credibility accordingly. Ms. Hayes, you may proceed." "Hayes, you may." Victoria looked directly at Elijah, then at the judge. "I met Elijah Washington 4 months ago when he paid for my coffee after my card was declined. He had no idea who I was. He just helped because someone needed help. That's who he is fundamentally. Someone who shows up." She continued, describing what she'd witnessed. The bedtime stories, the patient homework help, the way Elijah had structured his entire life around Caleb's needs without ever making it feel like sacrifice. I've watched him turn down opportunities that would compromise his time with his son. I've watched him teach Caleb about honesty and competence, and showing up even when things are hard. I've watched a child who lost his mother and sister find his way back to joy because his father refused to let grief be the only story. Patricia's attorney cut in. "Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that you hired Mr. Washington outside standard protocols after initially rejecting him? That this relationship started in a professional context that could be seen as inappropriate? I hired him because I realized our screening process had made an error. We flagged his 3-year gap as a liability when it was actually evidence of his character. He chose his son over his career, then rebuilt both without compromising either. That's not a red flag, that's integrity." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not here to advocate for myself. I'm here to advocate for a child who has a father that actually shows up, who reads to him every night, who knows his teachers' names, who lets him bring his homework to the office because being together matters more than perfect work-life separation. Patricia can offer resources and space, but she can't offer what Elijah gives Caleb every single day, which is the certainty that he is loved, seen, and prioritized above everything else." The attorney tried one more angle. "And what happens to Caleb if your relationship with Mr. Washington ends badly? Another loss, another disruption?" Victoria's voice didn't waver. "Then I'd handle it like an adult who cares about a child's well-being. But I'm not planning on it ending. I'm planning on building a life with them, and teaching Caleb that it's possible to love new people without forgetting the ones you've lost." When she stepped down, Elijah's eyes were bright. Finally, Elijah himself testified. He spoke about the night Simone died, about Caleb's silence in the months after, about the decision to leave Amazon and be present full-time. "I didn't quit because I couldn't handle the work. I quit because my son needed me more than I needed a title. For 6 months, getting him dressed and making breakfast was my full-time job. When he started talking again, when he started asking questions about his mom and sister, when he started sleeping through the night without nightmares, that's when I knew we were ready for the next thing." He described moving to Austin, taking the security job, rebuilding his technical skills in evening hours after Caleb was asleep. Patricia's attorney asked the obvious question. "Mr. Washington, your sister-in-law can provide private school, a large home, resources you admittedly cannot match. Why should this court believe you're the better option?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "Because Caleb doesn't need private school. He needs his father. He doesn't need a large home. He needs the place where his mother's favorite color is honored, where his drawings are on the walls, where he feels safe enough to ask hard questions. And he doesn't need resources. He needs someone who will always choose him first, no matter what." His voice roughened slightly. 3 years ago, I buried my wife and daughter. I promised them and Caleb that I would keep him safe, keep him whole, help him grow into someone who knows he's loved. I've kept that promise every single day. Patricia means well, but she's offering a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. My son isn't struggling. He's thriving. And I'm not giving him up." The attorney shifted tactics. "The missed medical appointments after your wife's death, weren't those a form of neglect? They were a father prioritizing his son's immediate emotional survival over routine checkups. Caleb wouldn't leave the house. He was terrified of hospitals because that's where his mother died. So I gave him time to heal before asking him to face that fear. When he was ready, we went. We haven't missed one since. That's not neglect. That's understanding trauma." The hearing lasted 4 hours. When it concluded, the judge said she'd issue a ruling within 10 days. Elijah and Victoria walked out of the courthouse into bright April sunshine, and neither spoke until they reached her car. Then Elijah's composure finally cracked. He leaned against the hood, hands shaking, breathing hard. Victoria wrapped her arms around him from behind, held on tight while he fell apart in a courthouse parking lot. "I can't lose him." The words came out broken. "Victoria, I can't." "You won't. We told the truth. That has to be enough." But she wasn't sure she believed it, and they both knew it. The ruling came on a Thursday. Rachel brought the envelope to Victoria's office, placed it on her desk without a word. Victoria stared at it for a long moment before calling Elijah. He arrived with Caleb in tow, school having let out early for teacher conferences. Caleb sat in the lobby with a coloring book while Elijah came into the office and closed the door. "It's here." Victoria nodded toward the envelope. Elijah picked it up, hands steadier than she expected. "You want to do this together?" "Yeah." He opened it, scanned the first page, then the second. His expression went very still. Victoria's heart dropped. "Elijah?" He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "She ruled in my favor. Full custody stays with me. Patricia's petition is denied." The relief hit Victoria like a physical force. She grabbed the paper from him, read it herself to be sure. The judge's language was clear. While Patricia Wright offers material advantages, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Caleb Washington is thriving in his father's care. Mr. Washington has shown consistent prioritization of his son's emotional, educational, and physical well-being. The concerns raised do not outweigh the clear bond and stability present in the current arrangement. Custody remains with Elijah Washington. Victoria looked up at him and they both started laughing. The kind of laughter that's half crying, pure release of tension they'd been carrying for weeks. Elijah pulled her into his arms, held her so tight she could barely breathe. "We did it. We actually did it. You did it. You showed them who you are." "No." He pulled back enough to look at her. "We did it. You stood up there and testified. You documented everything with Rachel. You fired Hawthorne to protect us. This is our win." She kissed him, hard and grateful and full of every promise they'd been too afraid to make out loud. When they pulled apart, Elijah went to get Caleb, brought him into the office, knelt down to his eye level. "Hey, buddy, you know how Aunt Patricia wanted you to live with her?" Caleb nodded, suddenly solemn. "The judge decided you're staying with me. We're staying together." Caleb's face split into a gap-toothed grin. "I knew we would. You promised." "I did, and I always will." Caleb threw his arms around Elijah's neck, and Victoria watched them hold each other. This family that had survived loss and fought their way back to wholeness. And understood she was part of this now. Not replacing what they'd had, but adding to what they were building. The authentication system launched 2 weeks later to industry acclaim. Security analysts called it the most rigorous consumer-facing framework released that year. 2 major enterprise clients signed contracts within 60 days. The Fortune 100 firm that had attended the presentation committed to a 5-year partnership worth over $80 million. At the launch celebration dinner, Victoria stood to make an announcement. "I want to recognize the team that made this possible. But more specifically, I want to announce that Elijah Washington is being promoted to Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. Elijah stood, clearly surprised despite having discussed the possibility with Victoria weeks earlier. His speech was characteristically brief. "This team built something that matters. I'm honored to help lead us into what comes next. Thank you for the trust." Later, after the formal dinner ended and people migrated to the bar, Hawthorne's former allies on the board approached Victoria one by one. Each offered some version of the same acknowledgement. "You made the right call." Patricia Chen was the most direct. "Gerald was playing a long game none of us saw clearly enough. You protected the company and your people. That's what leadership looks like." The vindication felt good, but what felt better was watching Elijah across the room, deep in conversation with Sophia about next-generation infrastructure, completely in his element. That night, Caleb had a sleepover with a school friend. Elijah took Victoria to the rooftop deck of his apartment building. The city spread below them, Austin in full spring bloom, warm and alive. He handed her a small box. Inside, on a length of thin gold chain, hung a tiny brass compass pendant. The needle, impossibly small, actually moved when she tilted it. "You gave me back the original compass. I had this made so you'd always have one." She turned it over in her fingers, marveling at the craftsmanship. "What does it point to? Where you need to go next, which isn't always where you planned." He fastened the chain around her neck. When she turned back to face him, something in her expression had opened. Softer, less defended, less like the CEO and more like the woman who sometimes cried alone after brutal board meetings. "I built everything I could think to build, Meridian, this reputation, this career. But I forgot to build anything that could hold me." His hands framed her face gently. "So let's build it together. You, me, Caleb. Something that honors what we've lost and makes space for what we're finding." Is that a proposal? Eventually. Right now it's a promise that I'm not going anywhere, that we're doing this honestly, one board at a time for as long as it takes. She kissed him under the Austin stars, the compass pendant between them, and let herself believe that sometimes close really was enough to start with. 6 months later, the Texas Innovation Summit brought the kind of recognition that changes trajectories. Meridian was nominated for 4 awards. They won 3. The final award of the evening, Innovator of the Year, went to Victoria. She stood at the podium in front of 600 people, found Elijah immediately in the 4th row with Caleb beside him in a clip-on tie, sitting very straight. Innovation isn't just about what we build, it's about who we choose to see and who we choose not to overlook. She spoke about the Open Door Initiative, the hiring program she'd launched in the months after Elijah's promotion. 14 people hired so far, all with non-linear career paths, all bringing perspective shaped by resilience. 14 months ago, I almost made a very costly mistake. Almost looked at a resume and decided a person's worth could be measured by their consistency. What I found when I looked more carefully was that the most resilient people I've ever worked with are the ones who had already been tested by something they didn't choose. She didn't use Elijah's name. Everyone in the industry knew the story by now anyway. The CEO who'd rejected a candidate, reversed the decision, fell in love, and built a company culture around second chances and earned opportunities. Every one of us has stood in front of a door that said no. The right response isn't finding a way around it, it's building a door where there wasn't one before. The applause was long and genuine. As she came down from the stage, Elijah met her at the bottom of the steps. Caleb stood beside him, holding a small origami crane he'd made specifically for the occasion. "You were really good, Miss Victoria." The compliment carried the weight of an 8-year-old's complete sincerity. "He's right." Elijah's voice was quiet, meant only for her. They stood together while the gala continued around them. This family they'd built from coffee shop kindness and corporate second chances, and the willingness to be vulnerable when everything in them screamed to stay safe. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that looked almost exactly like the one where everything started, they walked into the Daily Press together. The line stretched toward the door. Austin moved past the windows, indifferent to the small anniversary they were marking. Caleb spotted the counter first. "Dad, is this where you help the lady?" "Right here, buddy." Victoria ordered her usual. The barista was different now. Someone who didn't know the history of that transaction 14 months earlier. Her card went through fine, she added, "and 2 black coffees, one for him." The new barista smiled. "Cute family." Neither Victoria nor Elijah corrected the assumption, just accepted the drinks and stepped aside. Outside on the sidewalk, Caleb ran ahead toward the car, purple backpack bouncing. Victoria pulled the compass pendant from beneath her shirt, turned it over in her fingers. The habit had become automatic over the months, a touchstone when she needed grounding. Still points slightly off. Elijah smiled, the one that reached his eyes, the one Caleb had noticed made him look like the old pictures. But always gets you close enough. Close is perfect. They kissed there on 6th Street, morning commuters flowing around them, two people who'd found each other because a card was declined and a stranger stepped up. And sometimes the smallest kindnesses remake entire lives. Later, much later, Victoria would think about all the broken pieces that led to that morning. A failed transaction, a rainy highway 3 years earlier, a rejected resume, a compass with a sticky needle, and a man who'd laid $15 on a counter for a stranger before he had any reason to. "What are you thinking?" Elijah asked, reading her expression the way he'd learned to over 14 months. That it was never really about the coffee. He understood completely. No, it really wasn't. The epilogue wrote itself over the next year. Caleb's 10th birthday party filled the backyard of the house Victoria and Elijah bought together in East Austin. Not large, not ostentatious, just right for a family learning to grow into its new shape. Friends from Meridian mixed with parents from Caleb's school. Sophia brought a boyfriend no one had known existed. Rachel brought her wife and made everyone laugh with stories about the chaos of Victoria's first year as CEO. Patricia Wright came too. She'd apologized 6 months after the custody ruling, admitted that Hawthorne had manipulated her grief and concern into something weaponized. The relationship was still careful, still rebuilding, but Caleb had his aunt back in his life, and that mattered. The birthday cake was purple, Simone's favorite color, because some things you honor by keeping them present. When Caleb blew out the candles, Victoria asked what he'd wished for. He grinned, gap-toothed smile unchanged even as the rest of him grew taller and more confident. Can't tell or it won't come true. But later, cleaning up after everyone left, she found a new drawing on the refrigerator. A family of 4, Elijah and Caleb and Victoria drawn in careful detail, and in the corner, rendered in purple crayon, 2 figures with angel wings watching over them. Simone and Maya, not erased, not replaced. Present in the way love persists even when the people carrying it are gone. Elijah found her staring at the drawing, tears tracking quietly down her face. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin on her shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah, more than okay." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm just thinking about how far we've come. From that coffee shop to this." He kissed her forehead. "Sometimes the best direction is just forward. Together." She pulled back enough to look at him properly. "Is that what you told Caleb when he asked about getting married?" Elijah's expression shifted to surprise, then rueful amusement. "He told you? He's been practicing calling me Mom when you're not around. Wanted to make sure he had it right for when it was official." "And how does it sound?" "Perfect." She kissed him softly. "It sounds perfect." They stood in their kitchen, the house quiet around them, the compass pendant catching the light, and understood they'd built something worth protecting. Not by avoiding loss or pretending pain didn't exist, but by showing up honestly and doing the next right thing and trusting that competence and integrity eventually won. The final image, the one that would stay with both of them long after the details blurred, was simple. Elijah and Victoria watching Caleb play in the backyard as evening settled over Austin. The city indifferent to their small story. The compass on the table pointing true. A family built from broken pieces that somehow fit together better than anything whole. "Do you think we're doing this right?" Elijah asked it quietly. The question he'd carried since that first morning Victoria joined them for pancakes. "I think we're doing it honestly, and that's enough." He pulled her closer, kissed the top of her head, and they stayed there watching their son chase fireflies in the gathering dark. Proof that sometimes close isn't just enough to start with. Sometimes it's everything you need.